Hello. Come right on in. You're at Father Fish. Nice to have you with us.
Redirty tanks following your videos, and I'm constantly battling algae issues. What did I do wrong?
Well, there are a couple of things that you can do to take care of that. Number one, make sure you've got plenty of plants in there. Keep in mind that higher order plants, stem plants, rooted plants, rhizome plants, all of those kinds of plants are better at absorbing nutrients than algae is. So you want to have enough other kinds of plants in there to be able to compete with the algae. That's number one. Number two is pay attention to the nutrition that you're putting in the tank. Now, nutrition comes in every form imaginable, but primarily it's food, whatever your food source is. So, yeah, and the most common problem is overfeeding. And you may not know you're overfeeding. Overfeeding does not mean that there is food laying on the bottom. I mean, it can mean that, but that's not the only the only time. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not the only way in which you can overfeed. You can overfeed by simply increasing the bio load, the amount of biological material you're putting in the tank beyond the tank's ability to assimilate it. In other words, it may be that your fish are eating every bit of food you put in there. But when they create waste, they may be creating more waste than the rest of the life force in the tank, the plants, the substrate, and whatever are able to deal with. And you get algae as a result. That's number two. So control overfeeding. If you don't know whether or not you're overfeeding, reduce feeding by 50%. Just do it across the board. If you don't know, if you don't have a handle on it, reduce it by 50%. If I'm going to do a rabbit trail here because this is significant. If after a couple of weeks to a month you notice no difference at all, reduce it another 50%. In other words, don't treat food as the primary source of your interplay with the tank, of your involvement with the tank. It is not necessary for you to put food in that tank every single day like clockwork in order to keep it going. That does not keep the tank going. If anything, that will break it down and cause it to fail. If after a month everything looks perfectly fine, perfectly stable, decrease your feeding by 50% a third time. In other words, keep reducing the amount you're feeding until you reach a level where you feel it really is adding to the health of the tank and not simply putting an additional burden on the tank. So that's number two. Number three is to make sure your substrate, if you have an enriched substrate like dirt, make sure it is adequately capped. If you do not have an absolute minimum of 2 inches of sand on that dirt, it is not adequately capped, and you probably are having a release of nutrients coming up through the cap, entering the water column, which is the third way you create algae. Now, there are other things that can happen. Water that has a high level of nitrates or potassium or magnesium or whatever. That's less likely, less frequent a problem. But the basic ones are adequate plants. By adequate, that means 70%, 70% of the substrate should have plants in it. Controlling food, reducing it again, reducing it again. You will notice the fish then will be treating the tank as a source of nutrition rather than you putting food in as the source of nutrition, which means you're going to get a more balanced environment. And number three, making sure your nutritional foundation is adequately kept so you're not getting nutrition escaping into the water column. There, all three of which then can create algae problems. So there's that convoluted answer.
Well, I hope you found something you've never seen before. Have a great day. Nice having you with us. Come on back.